Well, hello everybody. I am Sam and you are listening to Chilliteracy, where this evening we've got a bit of an actual themed collection for you. I had initially thought I might even start the first one with just a straight cold open, but there is a little bit of a theme of, self-harm / suicide in there. And I thought maybe I should give a little bit of a warning beforehand, just a little slight heads up before we get to there. So I didn't do that, and here's your first warning. But yes, hello everybody, welcome in. I hope that we are well. It is certainly here in the UK 9 PM on Saturday evening, the 15th of March. And now the shipping forecast. So welcome. Andy, I see you've gone full goblin mode. Hell yeah, that's living life to its fullest. So yeah, the link to the first text is pinned there at the top of chat. The Malice of Inanimate Objects. We'll get to that in a second. Unless anyone can find for me a better link, it looks like, from what I've just been reading in my researches online, it was first published in 1933 and then not republished until 1984. It's very short. And it's very short and a little bit silly. But it sets up the theme for this evening. As I was picking out stories, I noticed that, hey, there's a few here about, cursed objects. And, oh, I see we've dropped 83 frames. Interesting. Why is it this channel drops frames and Longest John's Gaming doesn't? I wonder why that is. Okay, it's not a significant amount. 83 is, that's a bit, but I will again try to keep an eye on that. I started the stream early in case it was going to do anything and I needed to take it down and bring it back up, but no. Cool. Great. Okay, that's where we're at. Yeah. Did I have... Oh, Squirrel, you resubbed. That's what... I knew that was something. You did do that. Thank you very much for the 10 months. Much appreciated. You're working on a lab memo. Alright. Well, I hope that goes well for you. Do I have anything else? Or yeah, should we get into this first one and see what we're doing tonight? I guess we shall. If we're all ready. Again, a little bit of a content warning. This one does make reference to a character who is alleged to have taken their own life, and so just putting that out there. It's not like a heavy central subjects point or anything of the story, but it is just casually mentioned, and so I just thought I'd drop that in there now for all of you, just so that nobody gets jump scared by it. Yeah, you're welcome, Thunder, no problem. Yeah. Just finished the lab memo. This was a short one. Time for Hades 2. Hell yeah. Let's go. Right. If we're ready, as I say, your link's at the top of chat, unless anyone can find a better one in the process, which would be very handy for me when I stick it up on YouTube, because in general I like to link to Gutenberg, but I don't think there will be a better one than that. Yeah. Let's begin with tonight's first story and setting of the theme, The Malice of Inanimate Objects, by M.R. James. The malice of inanimate objects is a subject upon which an old friend of mine was fond of dilating, and not without justification. In the lives of all of us, short or long, there have been days, dreadful days, on which we have had to acknowledge, with gloomy resignation, that our world has turned against us. I do not mean the human world of our relations and friends. To enlarge on that is the province of nearly every modern novelist. In their books it is called life, and an odd enough hash it is as they portray it. No, it is the world of things that do not speak or work or hold congresses and conferences. It includes such beings as the collar stud, the inkstand, the fire, the razor, and, as age increases, the extra step on the staircase which leads you to either to expect or not to expect it. By these, and such as these, for I have named but the merest fraction of them, the word is passed around, and the day of misery arranged. is the tale still remembered of how the cock and the hen went to pay a visit to Squire Corbes, how on the journey they met with and picked up a number of associates, encouraging each with the announcement, "To Squire Corbes we are going, for a visit is owing." Thus they secured the company of the needle, the egg, the duck, the cat, possibly, for memory is a little treacherous here, and finally the millstone. And when it was discovered that Squire Corbes was for the moment out, they took up positions in his mansion and awaited his return. He did return, wearied, no doubt, by a day's work among his extensive properties. His nerves were first jarred by the raucous cry of the cock. He threw himself into his armchair and was lacerated by the needle. He went to the sink for a refreshing wash and splashed all over by the duck. Attempting to dry himself with the towel, he broke the egg upon his face. He suffered other indignities from the hen and her accomplices which I cannot now recollect, and finally, maddened with pain and fear, rushed out by the back door, and had his brains dashed out by the millstone that had perched itself in the appropriate place. Truly, in the concluding words of the story, this Squire Corbes must have been either a very wicked or a very unfortunate man. It is the latter alternative which I incline to accept. There is nothing in the preliminaries to show that any slur rested on his name, or that his visitors had any injury to avenge. And will not this narrative serve as a striking example of that malice of which I have taken upon me to treat? It is, I know, the fact that Squire Corbes's visitors were not all of them, strictly speaking, inanimate. But are we sure that the perpetrators of this malice are really inanimate either? There are tales which seem to justify a doubt. 2 men of mature years were seated in a pleasant garden after breakfast. One was reading the day's paper. The other sat with folded arms, plunged in thought, and on his face were a piece of sticking plaster and lines of care. His companion lowered his paper. "What," said he, "is the matter with you? The morning is bright, the birds are singing, I can hear no aeroplanes or motorbikes." "No," replied Mr. Burton. "It is nice enough, I agree, but I have a bad day before me. I cut myself shaving and spilt my tooth powder." "Ah," said Mr. Manners, "some people have all the luck." And with this expression of sympathy he reverted to his paper. "Hello," he exclaimed after a moment. "Is George Wilkins dead? We won't have any more bother with him, anyhow." "George Wilkins?" said Mr. Burton more than a little excitedly. "Why, I didn't even know he was ill." "No more he was, poor chap. Seems to have thrown up the sponge and put an end to himself. Yes," he went on, "some days back. This is the inquest. Seemed very much worried and depressed, they say." "What about, I wonder? Could it have been that will you and he were having a row about?" "Row?" said Mr. Burton angrily. "There was no row. He hadn't a leg to stand on. He couldn't bring a scrap of evidence." "No, it may have been half a dozen things. But Lord, I never imagined he'd take anything so hard as that." "I don't know," said Mr. Manners. "He was a man, I thought, who did take things hard. They rankled. Well, I'm sorry, though I never saw much of him. He must have gone through a lot to make him cut his throat. Not the way I should choose, by a long sight. Lucky he hadn't a family, anyhow. Look here, what about a walk round before lunch? I've an errand in the village." Mr. Burton assented rather heavily. He was perhaps reluctant to give the inanimate objects in the district a chance of getting at him. If so, he was right. He just escaped a nasty pearl over the scraper at the top of the steps. A thorny branch swept off his hat and scratched his fingers. As they climbed a grassy slope, he fairly leapt into the air with a cry and came down flat on his face. "What in the world?" said his friend, coming up. "A great string, of all things. What business? Oh, I see. Belongs to that kite," which lay on the grass a little farther up. "Now, if I can find out what little beast has left that kicking about, I'll let him have it." Or rather I won't, for he shan't see his kite again. It's rather a good one, too. As they approached, a puff of wind raised the kite, and it seemed to sit up on its end and look at them with two large round eyes painted red, and, below them, 3 large printed red letters, I-C-U. Mr. Manners was amused and scanned the device with care. "Ingenious," he said. "It's a bit of a poster, of course. I see. Full particulars, the word was." Mr. Burton, on the other hand, was not amused, but thrust his stick through the kite. Mr. Manners was inclined to regret this. "I dare say it serves him right," he said, "but he'd taken a lot of trouble to make it." "Who had?" said Mr. Burton sharply. "Oh, I see, you mean the boy." "Yes, to be sure, who else? But come on down now, I want to leave a message before lunch." As they turned a corner into the main street, a rather muffled and choky voice was heard to say, "Look out, I'm coming!" They both stopped as if they had been shot. "Who was that?" said Manners. "Blessed if I didn't think I knew." Then, with almost a yell of laughter, he pointed with his stick. A cage with a grey parrot in it was hanging in an open window across the way. "I was startled. By George! Gave you a bit of a turn too, didn't it?" Burton was inaudible. "Well, I shan't be a minute. You can go and make friends with the bird." But when he rejoined Burton, that unfortunate was not, it seemed, in trim for talking with either birds or men. He was some way ahead and going rather quickly. Manners paused for an instant at the parrot window, and then hurried on, laughing more than ever. "Have a good talk with Polly?" said he as he came up. "No, of course not," said Burton testily. "I didn't bother about the beastly thing." "Well, you wouldn't have got much out of her if you'd tried," said Manners. "I remember after a bit. They've had her in the window for years. She's stuffed." Burton seemed about to make a remark, but suppressed it. Decidedly this was not Burton's day out. He choked at lunch. He broke a pipe. He tripped in the carpet. He dropped his book in the pond in the garden. Later on, he had or professed to have a telephone call summoning him back to town next day and cutting short what should have been a week's visit. And so glum was he all the evening that Manners' disappointment in losing an ordinarily cheerful companion was not very sharp. At breakfast, Mr. Burton said little about his night, but he did intimate that he thought of looking in on his doxer. "My hand's so shaky," he said, "I really daren't shave this morning." "Oh, I'm sorry," said Mr. Manners. "My man could have managed that for you, but they'll put you right in no time." Farewells were said. By some means and for some reason Mr. Burton contrived to reserve a compartment to himself. The train was not of the corridor type. But these precautions avail little against the angry dead. I will not put dots or stars, for I dislike them, but I will say that apparently someone tried to shave Mr. Burton in the train, and did not succeed overly well. He was, however, satisfied with what he had done, if we may judge from the fact that on a once white napkin spread on Mr. Burton's chest was an inscription in red letters, G-E-O-W, Becci. Do not these facts, if facts they are, bear out my suggestion that there is something not inanimate behind the malice of inanimate objects? Do they not further suggest that when this malice begins to show itself we should be very particular to examine, and if possible rectify, any obliquities in our recent conduct? And do they not, finally, almost force upon us the conclusion that, like Squire Corbis, Mr. Burton must have been either a very wicked or a very singularly unfortunate man? The end. And I got tripped up in the middle of that because there was some missing punctuation. There was a bit of someone speaking that didn't have a closed quotation, so I just kept on reading it in their voice and had to go back and do it again. There you go. Lady Mephistopheles, you did find a project Gutenberg link, but it doesn't link directly to the story. Yeah, that's probably the one that is it Gutenberg Canada? Or, yes, that looks like it's Australia. Yes, gutenberg.net.au. Yeah. Yeah, you know, you ever just been... Yeah, I guess I'll use the other one because I like to link directly to the story. Punctuation? Yeah, exactly. Like, it's, you know, it's what we have. Dropped 261 frames. Why? Why is it when I stream on this channel, we start dropping frames? Like, I'm not going to take it down for that. I don't get why. What is going on? I literally, I dropped the bitrate so it is below 6,000 in the hope that Twitch would actually play nice, and it apparently still doesn't want to do that. Twitch is like, no, it's like, this is literally the most lo-fi minimal channel we can make this. Quit buttering your frames? No. Buttered frames taste better, everybody knows that. That's why when you go to a restaurant, you can't get the same frames at home. Alright? You want restaurant standard frames, you've got to use butter and salt. Haven't had any issues with the sound or visuals this time? Okay. Yeah, like it is a small amount, but that it keeps happening and going up is a bother to me, literally because I'm trying to make it such a minimal thing, and so I'm just like, are we just on Twitch's list? Like, are we just being bullied? But also, I don't want to, you know, I spend more time talking and complaining about it than it's actually causing problems for the stream. So, you know, there's a bit of philosophy for you. So yeah, there you go. The Malice of Inanimate Objects. I feel like it shows a little bit more of the fun side of M.R. James. Which, you know, he's, to me, when talking about, like, quite sort of stuffy, I guess. Diana, hello, welcome in. I tend to think of not every author from this era, but certainly like James and others like him as being sort of, say, sort of quite very stuffy, very old school, classical Christian, like, no, here's just a list of things that happened, blah, blah, blah. And there's, I don't know, there's little bits of humour in this, which always stand out to me. Yeah, I just find that now I'm trying to find it. But yeah, I don't know. There's just every now and then it's like, oh yeah, no, he did have a sense of humour. Okay, fair enough. Yeah. No, I don't just want to like give you a whole bunch of dead air while I sit and reread the story in my head. But yeah, something made you laugh and half choke on your food? Well, I'm oh no, it's spreading. It's coming for you. Yeah, there was a little bit about, right, when I find him, I'm going to give it to him, or shan't, because he's not going to get his kite back. That you know, there's that. Is it in the introduction? Well, I like the bit about, you know, include such beings as the collar stud, the inkstand, the fire, the razor, and as age increases, the extra step on the staircase, which leads you either to expect or not to expect it. You know, who can relate to the extra step or the missing step, and just whoop. Might have been the millstone. Oh yeah, yeah. Dash his brains out by the millstone that had perched itself in the appropriate place. Yep, there's that. But yeah, there you go. There's elevator music while I read. I should have that on a button, actually. That would be good. But yeah, there you go. That's the first story. We've got one. It was short. It was really more of an introduction. And so let's go on to... Which one would you like next, chat? The Uncommon Prayer Book, or A View from a Hill, which was adapted by Ian Fleming into James... No, it's nothing to do with James Bond. But it sounds very close to A View to a Kill, and I thought I would make that joke. Have an ongoing grudge against your basement doorknob, right? Maybe the doorknob's got a grudge against you, you know, consider that. Haunted Prayer Book? Uncommon Prayer Book? Yeah, we can do that. It is the shorter of the two. Let's unpin that message. And think of all our days where the universe conspires against us, all the little tiny things they pile up. Yeah, that's the thing. I've definitely had days like that, and I hope I've begun to realize as I get older that it's kind of a mental state thing on my part, where I will be, for one reason or another, I've woken up in like a bit of a bad mood or something, and so I myself am like stressed or agitated, and so I'm already not concentrating on the tasks that I'm trying to perform, or I'm trying to do them quickly, and just like, you know, whereas making coffee is just a brain off routine procedure for me when I'm in that kind of mood. If I don't identify that I'm in that mood and need to like, okay, I need to take an extra couple of seconds, I need to double check the steps, it's going to feel like I'm wasting time, but I need to do this, otherwise, whoops, yeah, I've spilled things, or I've overpoured the water, or, you know, I've let it boil for too long, that sort of, and, you know, just screwed up the process in some way, and, oh, now I'm angry at myself, and, you know, and then it spirals. And so, yeah, it's frankly quite relatable to feel like the world has just got it out for you on some days. But yeah, okay, now, damn it, now I have to find the story. No, that's A View from a Hill. There we go, the Uncommon Prayer Book. Okay, let's see how we go at this one. I don't think I have any content warnings to this one. I think it's pretty straightforward. So yeah, just a bunch of accents. Let's see if I can hold to them and keep them consistent. I've already forgotten what ones I was going to do. It's a good start. Country Bumpkin, I think. Right, let's give you a bit of that. When we get to the characters, anyway. If we are ready. This is our second story for tonight. The Uncommon Prayer Book. Mr. Davidson was spending the first week in January alone in a country town. The combination of circumstances had driven him to that drastic course. His nearest relations were enjoying winter sports abroad, and the friends who had been kindly anxious to replace them had an infectious complaint in the house. Doubtless he might have found someone else to take pity on him. But, he reflected, most of them have made up their parties, and after all it is only for 3 or 4 days at most that I have to fend for myself, and it will be just as well if I can get a move on with my introduction to the Leaventhorpe papers. I must use the time by going down as near as I can to Goldsford and making acquaintance with the neighbourhood. I ought to see the remains of Leaventhorpe House and the tombs in the church. The first day after his arrival at the Swan Hotel in Longbridge was so stormy that he got no farther than the tobacconist's. The next, comparatively bright, he used for his visit to Goldsford, which interested him more than a little, but had no ulterior consequences. The third, which was really a pearl of a day for early January, was too fine to be spent indoors. He gathered from the landlord that a favourite practice of visitors in the summer was to take a morning train to a couple of stations westward, and walk back down the valley of the Tent, through Stanford St. Thomas and Stanford Magdalen, both of which were accounted highly picturesque villages. He closed with this plan, and we now find him seated in a third-class carriage at 9:45 a.m. on his way to Kingsbourne Junction, and studying the map of the district. One old man was his only fellow traveller, a piping old man who seemed inclined for conversation. So Mr. Davidson, after going through the necessary versicles and responses about the weather, inquired whether he was going far. "No, sir, not far, not this morning, sir," said the old man. "I ain't only going so far as what they call Kingsbourne Junction. There isn't but 2 stations betwixt here and there. Yes, they calls it Kingsbourne Junction." "I'm going there too," said Mr. Davidson. "Oh, indeed, sir. Do you know the part?" "No, I'm only going for the sake of taking a walk back to Longbridge and seeing a bit of the country." "Oh, indeed, sir. Well, 'tis a beautiful day for a gentleman as enjoys a bit of a walk." "Yes, to be sure. Have you got far to go when you get to Kingsbourne?" "No, sir, I ain't got far to go once I get to Kingsbourne Junction. I'm going to see my daughter, sir. She lives at Broxton. That's about 2 miles across the field from what they call Kingsbourne Junction, that is. You got that marked down on your map, I expect, sir?" "I expect I have. Let me see. Broxton, did you say? Here's Kingsbourne, yes. And which way is Broxton? Towards the Stanfords?" "Ah, I see it. Broxton Court, in a park. I don't see the village, though." "No, sir, you wouldn't see no village of Broxton. There ain't only the court and the chapel at Broxton." "Chapel? Oh, yes, that's marked here, too. The chapel, close by the court, it seems to be. Does it belong to the court?" "Yes, sir, that's close up to the court, only a step. Yeah, that belongs to the court. My daughter, you see, sir, she's a keeper's wife now, and she live at the court and look after things now the family's away." "No one living there now, then?" "No, sir, not for a number of years. The old gentleman, he lived there when I were a lad, and the lady, she lived on after him to very near upon 90-year age. And then she died, and them that have it now, they've got this other place, in Warwickshire, I believe it is, and they don't do nothing about letting the court out. But Colonel Wildman, he have the shooting, and young Mr. Clark, he's the agent. He come over once in so many weeks to see to things. And my daughter's husband, he's the keeper." "And who uses the chapel? Just the people roundabout, I suppose?" "Oh, no one don't use the chapel. Why, there ain't no one to go. All the people about, they go to Stanford St. Thomas Church. But my son-in-law, he go to Kingsbourne Church now, because the gentleman at Stanford, he have this Gregory singing, and my son-in-law, he don't like that. He say he can hear the old donkey braying any day of the week, and he likes something a little cheerful on the Sunday." The old man drew his hand across his mouth and laughed. "That's what my son-in-law say. He say he can't hear the old donkey," etc. The copper. Mr. Davidson also laughed as honestly as he could, thinking, meanwhile, that Broxton Court and Chapel would probably be worth including in his walk, for the map showed that from Broxton he could strike the Tent Valley quite as easily as by following the main Kingsbourne-Longbridge road. So when the mirth excited by the remembrance of the son-in-law's bon mot had died down, he returned the charge, and ascertained that both the court and the chapel were of the class known as old-fashioned places, and that the old man would be very willing to take him thither, and his daughter would be happy to show him whatever she could. "But that ain't a lot, sir, not as if the family was living there. All the looking-glasses is covered up, and the paintings and the curtains and carpets folded away. Not but what I dare say she could show you a pair just to look at, because she go over them to see us the Marsh are getting into 'em." "I shan't mind about that, thank you. If she can show me the inside of the chapel, that's what I'd like to see." "Oh, she can show you that right enough, sir. She had the key of the door, you see, and most weeks she'd go in and dust about. It's a nice chapel, that is. My son-in-law, he say he'll be bound they didn't have none of this Gregory singing there. Dear, I can't help but smile when I think of him saying about the old donkey. I can hear him pray, he say, any day of the week. That's all he can, sir, that's true anyway." The walk across the fields from Kingsbourne to Broxton was very pleasant. It lay, for the most part, on the top of the country, and commanded wide views over a succession of ridges, plough and pasture, or covered with dark blue woods, all ending, more or less abruptly, on the right in headlands that overlooked the wide valley of a great western river. The last field they crossed was bounded by a close copse, and no sooner were they in it than the path turned downward very sharply, and it became evident that Broxton was neatly fitted into a sudden and very narrow valley. It was not long before they had glimpses of groups of smokeless stone chimneys and stone-tiled roofs close beneath their feet, and not many minutes after that they were wiping their shoes at the back door of Broxton Court, while the keeper's dogs barked very loudly in unseen places, and Mrs. Porter, in quick succession, screamed at them to be quiet, greeted her father, and begged both her visitors to step in. Part 2. It was not to be expected that Mr. Davidson should escape being taken through the principal rooms of the court, in spite of the fact that the house was entirely out of commission. Pictures, carpets, curtains, furniture were all covered up or put away, as old Mr. Avery had said, and the admiration which our friend was very ready to bestow had to be lavished on the proportions of the rooms, and on the one painted ceiling upon which an artist who had fled from London in the plague year had depicted the triumph of loyalty and defeat of sedition. In this Mr. Davidson could show an unfeigned interest. The portraits of Cromwell, Ireton, Bradshaw, Peters, and the rest, writhing in carefully devised torments, were evidently the part of the design to which most pains had been devoted. "That where the old lady Sadler had the painting done, same as the one what put up the chapel. They say she were the first that went—" Oh, Mr. Avery, sorry, I just skimmed ahead. "That where the old lady Sadler that had that painting done, same as the one what put up the chapel. They say she were the first that went up to London to dance on Oliver Cromwell's grave." So said Mr. Avery, and continued musingly, "Well, I suppose she's got some satisfaction to her mind. But I don't know as I should want to pay the fare to London and back just for that. My son-in-law, he say the same. He say he don't know he should have cared to pay all that money only for that. I was telling the gentleman as we come along on the train, Mary, what your Harry says about this Gregory singing down at Stanford here. You had a bit of a laugh over that, sir, didn't us?" "Yes, to be sure we did." Once again Mr. Davidson strove to do justice to the pleasantry of the keeper. "But," he said, "if Mrs. Porter can show me the chapel, I think it should be now, for the days aren't long, and I want to get back to Longbridge before it falls quite dark." Even if Broxton Court has not been illustrated in rural life, and I think it has not, I do not propose to point out its excellences here. But of the chapel a word must be said. It stands about 100 yards from the house, and has its own little graveyard and trees about it. It is a stone building about 70 feet long, and in the Gothic style, as that style was understood in the middle of the 17th century. On the whole, it resembles some of the Oxford College chapels as much as anything, save that it has a distinct chancel, like a parish church, and a fanciful domed bell turret at the southwest angle. When the west door was thrown open, Mr. Davidson could not repress an exclamation of pleased surprise at the completeness and richness of the interior. Screenwork, pulpit, seating, and glass, all were of the same period, and as he advanced into the nave and sighted the organ case with its gold-embossed pipes in the western gallery, his cup of satisfaction was filled. The glass in the nave windows was chiefly armorial, and in the chancel were figure subjects, of the kind that may be seen at Abbey Door of Lord Scudamore's work. But this is not an archaeological review. While Mr. Davidson was busy still examining the remains of the organ, attributed to one of the Dallams, I believe, old Mr. Avery had stumped up into the chancel and was lifting the dust-cloths from the blue velvet cushions of the stall desks. Evidently it was here that the family sat. Mr. Davidson heard him say in a rather hushed tone of surprise, "Why, Mary, is all the books open again?" The reply was in a voice that sounded peevish rather than surprised. "Well, there, I never." Mrs. Porter went over to where her father was standing, and they continued talking in a lower key. Mr. Davidson saw plainly that something not quite in the common run was under discussion, so he came down the gallery stairs and joined them. There was no sign of disorder in the chancel any more than in the rest of the chapel, which was beautifully clean. but the 8-folio prayer books on the cushions of the stall desks were indubitably open. Mrs. Porter was inclined to be fretful over it. "Whoever can it be as does it?" she said. "But there's no key but mine, nor yet door but the one we come in by, and the windows is barred, every one of 'em. I don't like it, father, that I don't." "What is it, Mrs. Porter? Anything wrong?" said Mr. Davidson. "No, sir, nothing really wrong, only these books. Every time, pretty near, that I come in to do up the place, I shuts 'em and spreads the cloths over 'em to keep off the dust, ever since Mr. Clark spoke about it when I first come. And yet, there they are again, and always the same page. And as I says, whoever it can be as does it with the door and windows shut, and as I says, it makes anyone feel queer coming in here alone, as I have to do. Not as I'm given that way myself, not to be frightened easy, I mean to say. And there's not a rat in the place, not as no rat wouldn't trouble to do a thing like that, do you think, sir?" "Hardly, I should say. But it sounds very queer. Are they always open at the same place, did you say?" "Always the same place, sir. One of the psalms it is, and I didn't particular notice it the first time or two, till I see a little red line of printing, and it's always caught me eye since." Mr. Davidson walked along the stalls and looked at the open books. Sure enough, they all stood at the same page, Psalm CIX, and at the head of it, just between the number and Deus Laudum, was a rubric for the 25th day of April. Without pretending to minute knowledge of the history of the Book of Common Prayer, he knew enough to be sure that this was a very odd and wholly unauthorized addition to its text. And though he remembered that April 25th is St. Mark's Day, he could not imagine what appropriateness this very savage psalm could have to that festival. With slight misgivings he ventured to turn over the leaves to examine the title page, and knowing the need for particular accuracy in these matters, he devoted some 10 minutes to making a line-for-line transcript of it. The date was 1653. The printer called himself Anthony Cadman. He turned to the list of proper psalms for certain days, and, yes, added to it was the same inexplicable entry, for the 25th day of April, the 109th psalm. An expert would no doubt have thought of many other points to inquire into, but this antiquary, as I have said, was no expert. He took stock, however, of the binding, a handsome one of tooled blue leather, bearing the arms that figured in several of the nave windows in various combinations. "How often," he said at last to Mrs. Porter, "have you found these books lying open like this?" "Really, I couldn't say, sir, but it's a great many times now. Do you recollect, father, me telling you about it the first time I noticed it?" "That I do, my dear. You was in a rare taking, and I don't so much wonder at it. That was 5 year ago I was paying you a visit at Michaelmas time, and you come in at tea time and says you, 'Father, there's the books lying open under the cloths again.' And I didn't know what my daughter was speaking about, you see, sir, but I says, 'Books?' Just like that, I says. And then it all come out. But as Harry says, that's my son-in-law, sir, whoever it can be, he says, as does it, because there ain't only the one door, and we keeps the key locked up, he says, and the windows is barred, every one of 'em. Well, he says, I lay once and I could catch 'em at it, they wouldn't do it a second time, he says. And no more they wouldn't, I don't believe, sir. Well, that was 5 year ago, and it's been happening constant ever since, by your account, my dear. Young Mr. Clark, he don't seem to think much to it. But then he don't live here, you see, and 'tisn't his business to come and clean up here of a dark afternoon, is it? I suppose you never notice anything else odd when you're at work here, Mrs. Porter? Said Mr. Davidson. No, sir, I do not, said Mrs. Porter. It's a funny thing to me, I don't, with the feeling I have as there's someone sitting here. No, it's the other side, just within the screen, and looking at me all the time. I'm dusting in the gallery and pews. I never yet see nothing worse than myself, as the saying goes, and I kindly hope I never may. Part 3. In the conversation that followed, there was not much of it. Nothing was added to the statement of the case. Having parted on good terms with Mr. Avery and his daughter, Mr. Davidson addressed himself to his 8-mile walk. The little valley of Broxton soon led him down into the broader one of the tent, and on to Stanford St. Thomas, where he found refreshment. We need not accompany him all the way to Longbridge, but as he was changing his socks before dinner, he suddenly paused and said half aloud, "By Jove, that is a rum thing!" It had not occurred to him before how strange it was that any edition of the prayer book should have been issued in 1653, 7 years before the Restoration, 5 years before Cromwell's death, and when the use of the book, let alone printing of it, was penal. He must have been a bold man who put his name and a date on that title page. Only, Mr. Davidson reflected, it probably was not his name at all, for the ways of printers in difficult times were devious. As he was in the front hall of the Swan that evening, making some investigations about trains, a small motor stopped in front of the door, and out of it came a small man in a fur coat who stood on the steps and gave directions in a rather yapping foreign accent to his chauffeur. When he came into the hotel, he was seen to be black-haired and pale-faced, with a little pointed beard and gold pince-nez, altogether very neatly turned out. He went into his room, and Mr. Davidson saw no more of him till dinner-time. As they were the only two dining that night, it was not difficult for the newcomer to find an excuse for falling into talk. He was evidently wishing to make out what brought Mr. Davidson into that neighbourhood at the season. "You tell me how far it is from here to Arlingworth?" was one of his early questions, and it was one which threw some light on his own plans. For Mr. Davidson recollected having seen at the station an advertisement of the sale at Arlingworth Hall, comprising old furniture, pictures, and books. This, then, was a London dealer. "No," he said, "I've never been there. I believe it lies out by Kingsbourne. It can't be less than 12 miles. I see there's a sale there shortly." The other looked at him inquisitively, and he laughed. "No," he said, as if answering a question. "You needn't be afraid of my competing. I'm leaving this place tomorrow." This cleared the air, and the dealer, whose name was Homburger, admitted that he was interested in books and thought there might be in those old country house libraries something to repay a journey. "For," said he, "we English have always this marvellous talent for accumulating rarities in the most unexpected places, ain't it?" And in the course of the evening he was most interesting on the subject of finds made by himself and others. "I shall take the occasion after the sale to look around the district a bit. Perhaps you could inform me of some likely spots, Mr. Davidson." But Mr. Davidson, though he had seen some very tempting locked-up bookcases at Broxton Court, kept his counsel. He did not really like Mr. Homburger. Next day, as he sat in the train, a little ray of light came to illuminate one of yesterday's puzzles. He happened to take out an almanac diary that he had bought for the new year, and it occurred to him to look at the remarkable events for April 25th. There it was, St. Mark, Oliver Cromwell, born 1599. That, coupled with the painted ceiling, seemed to explain a good deal. The figure of old Lady Sadler became more substantial to his imagination, as of one in whom love for church and king has gradually given place to intense hate of the power that had silenced the one and slaughtered the other. What curious evil service was that which she and a few like her had been wont to celebrate year by year in that remote valley? And how in the world had she managed to elude authority? And again, did not this persistent opening of the books agree oddly with the other traits of her portrait known to him? It would be interesting for anyone who chanced to be near Broxton on the 25th of April to look in at the chapel and see if anything exceptional happened. When he came to think of it, there seemed to be no reason why he should not be that person himself. He, and if possible some congenial friend. He resolved that so it should be. Knowing that he knew really nothing about the printing of prayer books, he realized that he must make it his business to get the best light on the matter without divulging his reasons. I may say at once that his search was entirely fruitless. One writer of the early part of the 19th century, a writer of rather windy and rhapsodical chat about books, professed to have heard of a special anti-Cromwellian issue of the prayer book in the very midst of the Commonwealth period, but he did not claim to have seen a copy, and no one had believed him. Looking into this matter, Mr. Davidson found that the statement was based on letters from a correspondent who had lived near Longbridge, so he was inclined to think that the Broxton prayer books were at the bottom of it, and had excited a momentary interest. Months went on, and St. Mark's Day came near. Nothing interfered with Mr. Davidson's plans of visiting Broxton, or with those of a friend whom he had persuaded to go with him, and to whom alone he had confided the puzzle. The same 9:45 train which had taken him in January took them now to Kingsbourne. The same field path led them to Broxton. But today they stopped more than once to pick a cowslip. The distant woods and ploughed uplands were of another colour, and in the copse there was, as Mrs. Porter said, a regular charm of birds, why you couldn't hardly collect your mind sometimes with it. She recognized Mr. Davidson at once, and was very ready to do the honours of the chapel. The new visitor, Mr. Witham, was as much struck by the completeness of it as Mr. Davidson had been. "There can't be such another in England," he said. "Books open again, Mrs. Porter?" said Davidson as they walked up to the chancel. "Dear, yes, I expect so, sir," said Mrs. Porter as she drew off the cloths. "Well, there!" she exclaimed the next moment, "if they ain't shut! That's the first time ever I found 'em so. But it's not for want of care on my part, I do assure you, gentlemen, if they wasn't, for I felt the cloths the last thing before I shut up last week, when the gentleman had done photographed in the east window, and every one was shut, and where there was ribbons left I tied 'em. Now I think of it, I don't remember ever to have done that afore, and perhaps, whoever it is, it just made the difference to him. Well, it only shows, don't it? If at first you don't succeed, try again." Meanwhile the two men had been examining the books, and now Davidson spoke. "I'm sorry to say I'm afraid there's something wrong here, Mrs. Porter. These are not the same books." It would make too long a business to detail all Mrs. Porter's outcries and the questionings that followed. The upshot was this. Early in January the gentleman had come to see over the chapel and thought a great deal of it, and said he must come back in the spring weather and take photographs. And only a week ago he had drove up in the morning car, and a very heavy box with the slides in it. And she had locked him in because he said something about a long explosion, and she was afraid of some damage happening, and he says no, not an explosion, but it appeared the lantern what they take the slides with worked very slow, and so he was in there the best part of an hour, and she come and let him out, and he drove off with his box and all, and gave her his visiting card, and oh dear, to think of such a thing, he must have changed the books and took the old ones away with him in his box. What sort of man was he? Oh dear, he was a small-made gentleman, if you can call him so, after the way he behaved, with black hair, that is, if it was his hair, and gold eyeglasses, if they was gold. Really, one don't know what to believe. Sometimes I doubt he weren't a real Englishman at all. And yet he seemed to know the language, and had a name on his visiting card like anybody else might. Just so. Might we see the card? Yes, T.W. Henderson, and an address somewhere near Bristol. Well, Mrs. Porter, it's quite plain that this Mr. Henderson, as he calls himself, has walked off with your 8 prayer books, and put 8 others, about the same size, in place of them. Now, listen to me. I suppose you must tell your husband about this, but neither you nor he must say one word about it to anyone else. If you'll give me the address of the agent, Mr. Clark, isn't it? I will write to him and tell him exactly what has happened, and that it really is no fault of yours. But you understand we must keep it very quiet. And why? Because this man who has stolen the books will of course try to sell them one at a time, for I may tell you they are worth a good deal of money, and the only way we can bring it home to him is by keeping a sharp lookout and saying nothing. By dint of repeating the same advice in various forms, they succeeded in impressing Mrs. Porter with the real need for silence, and were forced to make a concession only in the case of Mr. Avery, who was expected on a visit shortly. "But you may be safe with my father, sir," said Mrs. Porter. "Father ain't a talking man." It was not quite Mr. Davidson's experience of him. Still, there were no neighbours at Broxton, and even Mr. Avery must be aware that gossip with anybody in such a subject would be likely to end in the Porters having to look out for another situation. A last question was whether Mr. Henderson, so called, had anyone with him. "No, sir, not when he come, he hadn't. He was working his own motoring car himself, and what luggage he had, let me see. There was his lantern and his box of slides inside the carriage, which I helped him into the chapel and out of it myself with it. If only I'd knowed. And as he drove away under the big yew tree by the monument, I see the long white bundle laying on the top of the coach. Well, I didn't notice when he drove up. But he sat in the front, sir, and only the boxes inside behind him. Do you really think, sir, as his name weren't Henderson at all?" "Dear me, what a dreadful thing. Why, fancy what trouble it might bring to an innocent person that might never have set foot in the place but for that." They left Mrs. Porter in tears. On the way home, there was much discussion as to the best means of keeping watch upon possible sales. What Henderson, Homburger, for there could be no real doubt of the identity, had done was obviously to bring down the requisite number of folio prayer books, disused copies from college chapels and the like, bought ostensibly for the sake of the bindings, which were superficially like enough to the old ones, and to substitute them at his leisure for the genuine articles. A week had now passed without any public notice being taken of the theft. He would take a little time himself to find out about the rarity of the books, and would ultimately, no doubt, place them cautiously. Between them, Davidson and Witham were in a position to know a good deal of what was passing in the book world, and they could map out the ground pretty completely. A weak point with them at the moment was that neither of them knew under what other name or names Henderson Homburger carried on business, but there are ways of solving these problems. And yet, all this planning proved unnecessary. Part 4. We are transported to a London office on this same 25th of April. We find there, within closed doors, late in the day, 2 police inspectors, a commissionaire, and a youthful clerk. The 2 latter, both rather pale and agitated in appearance, are sitting on chairs and being questioned. "How long do you say you've been in this Mr. Poshwitz's employment? 6 months? And what was his business? Attended sales in various parts and brought home parcels of books. Did he keep a shop anywhere? No? Disposed of them here and there, and sometimes to private collectors? Right. Now then, when did he go out last? Rather better than a week ago. Tell you where he was going? No? Said he was going to start the day from his private residence and shouldn't be at the office. That's here, eh? Before 2 days. You was to attend as usual. Where's his private residence? Oh, that's the address. Norwood Way, I see. Any family? Not in his country? Now then, what account do you give of what's happened since he came back? Came back on Tuesday, did he? And this is the Saturday. Bring any books? 1 package. Where is it? In the safe. You got the key? No, to be sure, it's open, of course. How did he seem when he got back? Cheerful? Well, but how do you mean? Curious? Thought he might be in for an illness. He said that, did he? Odd smell got on his nose, couldn't get rid of it? Told you to let him know who wanted to see him before you let him in? That wasn't usual with him. Much the same all Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? Out a good deal. Said he was going to the British Museum. Often went there to make inquiries in the way of his business. Walked up and down a lot in the office when he was in. Anyone call in on those days? Mostly when he was out. Anyone find him in? Oh, Mr. Collinson. Who's Mr. Collinson? An old customer. Knows his address? All right, give it us afterwards. Well, now, what about this morning? You left Mr. Poshwitz's here at 12 and went home. Anybody see you? Commissioner, you did? Remained at home till summoned here. Very well. Now, Commissioner, we have your name. Watkins, eh? Very well. Make your statement. Don't go too quick, so as we can get it down. I was on duty here later than usual, Mr. Potwitch having asked me to remain on and ordered his luncheon to be sent in, which came as ordered. I was in the lobby from 11:30 on, and see Mr. Bligh, the clerk, leave at about 12. After that, no one come in at all except Mr. Potwitch's luncheon come at 1 o'clock, and the man left in 5 minutes' time. Towards the afternoon, I became tired of waiting, and I come upstairs to this first floor. The outer door, what lead to the office, stood open, and I come up to the plate glass door here. Mr. Potwitch, he was standing behind the table smoking a cigar, and he laid it down on the mantelpiece and felt his trouser pockets and took out a key and went across to the safe. And I knocked on the glass, thinking to see if he wanted me to come in and take away his tray. He didn't take no notice, being engaged with the safe door. Then he got it open and stooped down and seemed to be lifting up a package off of the floor of the safe. And then, sir, I see what looked to be a great roll of old shabby white flannel about 4 to 5 feet high, fall forwards out of the inside of the safe, right against Mr. Potwitch's shoulder as he was stooping over. Mr. Potwitch, he raised himself up, as it were, resting his hands on the package and gave exclamation. I can't hardly expect you should take what I says, but as true as I stand here, I see this roll had a kind of a face in the upper end of it, sir. You can't be more surprised than what I was, I can assure you, and I've seen a lot in my time. Yes, I can describe it if you wish it, sir. It was very much the same as this wall here in colour. The wall had an earth-coloured distemper, and it had a bit of a band tied around it underneath. And the eyes, well, they was dry-like, and much as if there was 2 big spiders' bodies in the holes. Hair? Nah, I don't know there was much hair to be seen. The flannel stuff was over the top of the head. I'm sure it wasn't what it should have been, so I'm very sure it wasn't what it should have been. No, I only see it in a flash, but I took it in like a photograph. Wish I hadn't. Yes, sir, it fell right over onto Mr. Potwitch's shoulder, and the face hid in his neck. Yes, sir, about where the injury was. More like a ferret going for a rabbit than anything else. And he rolled over, and of course I tried to get in at the door, but as you know, sir, it was locked on the inside. All I could do, I rang up everyone, and the surgeon come, and the police, and you gentlemen, and you know as much as what I do. If you won't be requiring me any more today, I'd be glad to be getting off home. That shook me up more than I thought for. Well, said one of the inspectors when they were left alone, and, well, said the other inspector, and after a pause, what's the surgeon's report again? You've got it there? Yes, effect on the blood like the worst kind of snake bite, death almost instantaneous. I'm glad of that for his sake. He was a nasty sight. No case for detaining this man, Watkins, anyway. We know all about him, and what about this safe now? We better go get over it again, and, by the way, we haven't opened that package he was busy with when he died. Well, handle it careful, said the other. There might be the snake in it, for what you know. Get a light into the corners of the place, too. Well, there's room for a shortish person to stand up in, but what about ventilation? Perhaps, said the other, slowly, as he explored the safe with an electric torch. Perhaps they didn't require that much of it. My word, it strikes warm coming out of that place. Like a vault it is. But here, what's this bank like of a dust all spread out into the room? That must have come there since the door was opened. It would seep it all away if you moved it. See? Now what do you make of that? Make of it? About as much as I make of anything else in this case. One of London's mysteries this is going to be, by what I can see. And I don't believe a photographer's box full of large-size, old-fashioned prayer books is going to take us much further. But that's just what your package is. It was a natural but hasty utterance. The preceding narrative shows that there was, in fact, plenty of material for constructing a case, and when once Messrs. Davidson and Witham had brought their end to Scotland Yard, the join-up was soon made, and the circle completed. To the relief of Mrs. Porter, the owners of Broxton decided not to replace the books in the chapel. They repose, I believe, in a safe deposit in town. The police have their own methods of keeping certain matters out of the newspapers. Otherwise, it can hardly be supposed that Watkins' evidence about Mr. Poshwitz's death could have failed to furnish a good many headlines of a startling character to the press. The end. Thank you for listening. Yeah, it brings us neatly to break time. So, yeah, there you go. Bye-bye. Spooky books. Right, can check OBS. How many frames did we drop? With 530. Yeah, that's really weirdly. And also, the bitrate is higher than it should be. You're 5999 constant bitrate, and you're up in 6100. Why? Anyway. I am going to send you all over to a break. That's talking like I'm ending the stream. No, we've got another story to come back to in the second half, which will be A View from a Hill. That classic Bond song. I've done the joke already, I'm doing it again, you can't stop me. So yeah, exactly, break time. You know what to do, cycle your fluids, stroke the cat, and whatever, yeah, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'll see you back here in 5 minutes or so, friends. Bye for now. Welcome back, everybody, and welcome in, Angeline. Hello. Good to see you. How are the stories today? Haunted. And in the case of this evening, specifically about haunted objects. I thought I saw room for a theme, and we're going with it. What, can I close some links? Yes, I can close some links. Books haunted, exactly. Always has been. Books, and I mean, yeah, open with a short one about just inanimate objects. You know, when you have Rex Kindle. Wait, no, that's, you know, Kindles are worse. That can be haunted in so many ways. Yeah, we open with a story about just generally, you know, you had a bad day and you tripped over the boot scraper and jabbed yourself in the gums with a toothbrush and slipped while cutting an onion and spilled your coffee beans everywhere and burnt yourself on the kettle, and you know, having one of those days. And yeah, that was the first one. And then, you know, some haunted prayer books that bit a man like a snake. You know, spoilers, but the story's just finished and it's nigh on 100 years old, so, you know, you've had time. And now, I'm going to link in chat. Let's get rid of that. Go. Unpin, go. This will be, I'm not going to go straight into it. We can, you know, we can vibe for a second. Kids, right? That's what we say. I cannot say the name of View from a Hill without... Was it Duran Duran did the Bond theme, A View to a Kill? Was that them? Do I have to Google that? Am I going to Google that? Yeah, I'm going to Google that. 1 second. It was Duran Duran. Hell yeah. 80s kids, rise up. But not too fast, you'll get dizzy and your back will hurt. Right. I said we weren't going to go straight into it, but you know what? It's 10 past 10. So who's ready for another story? No spoilers. I'm not going to tell you what happens in this one. No one's asked, but it just popped into my brain. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to tell you what this one's about. No, I don't need to do that. That's literally why we're here. Ready as you'll ever be. That's all I needed to hear. Right. Yeah, if we're ready. Hang on, were there any dodgy pronunciation? Well, not dodgy pronunciation. Whether... Did we get... I don't think there's any Latin in this one. I think we're okay. I hope everyone caught... There was some Latin in the first one. Facci. I believe. There may or may not be a view. Spoiler, there is a hill. Yep, there is a hill and a view. Possible Latin, I don't think. Are there any names or bits? I'm just trying to see any notes I've left for myself in the margin about how to pronounce things. No. How to pronounce hill. Isle. No. If we are ready to have our final story for tonight. By Mr. James. They're all by Mr. James. Every story tonight. Welsh. You from a yeah, that's good. No, it's gonna upset Joey. If we are ready, this is our third and final story for the evening by M.R. James, and it's titled "A View from a Hill." I can't not hear Duran Duran. How pleasant it can be, alone in a first-class railway carriage, on the first day of a holiday that is to be fairly long, to dawdle through a bit of English country that is unfamiliar, stopping at every station. You have a map open on your knee, and you pick out the villages that lie to right and left by their church towers. You marvel at the complete stillness that attends your stoppage at the stations, broken only by a footstep crunching the gravel. Yet perhaps that is best experienced after sundown, and the traveller I have in mind was making his leisurely progress on a sunny afternoon in the latter half of June. He was in the depths of the country. I need not particularize further than to say that if you divided the map of England into 4 quarters, he would have been found in the southwestern of them. He was a man of academic pursuits, and his term was just over. He was on his way to meet a new friend older than himself. The two of them had met first on an official inquiry in town, and found that they had many tastes and habits in common, liked each other, and the result was an invitation from Squire Richards to Mr. Fanshawe, which was now taking effect. The journey ended about 5 o'clock. Fanshawe was told by a cheerful country porter that the car from the hall had been fetched from half a mile further on, and would the gentleman please to wait a few minutes till it came back. "But I see," continued the porter, "as you've got your bicycle, and very like you'd find a pleasant... I'll start that again. "Well, I see," continued the porter, "as you've got your bicycle, and very like you'd find it pleasanter to ride up to the hall yourself. Straight up the road here, and then first turn to the left. It ain't above 2 mile, and I'll see as your things is put in the car for you. You'll excuse me mentioning it, only I thought it would a nice evening for a ride. Yes, sir, very seasonable weather for the haymakers. Let me see. I have your bike ticket. Thank you, sir, much obliged. You can't miss your road," etc., etc. The 2 miles to the hall were just what was needed, after the day in the train, to dispel somnolence and impart a wish for tea. The hall, when sighted, also promised just what was needed in the way of a quiet resting place after days of sitting on committees and college meetings. It was neither excitingly old nor depressingly new. Plastered walls, sash windows, old trees, smooth lawns were the features which Fanshawe noticed as he came up the drive. Squire Richards, a burly man of 60-odd, was awaiting him on the porch with evident pleasure. "Tea first?" he said. "Or would you like a longer drink? No? All right. Tea's ready in the garden. Come along. They'll put your machine away. I always have tea under the lime tree by the stream on a day like this." Nor could you ask for a better place. Midsummer afternoon, shade and scent of a vast lime tree, cool swirling water within 5 yards. It was long before either of them suggested a move, but about 6, Mr. Richards sat up, knocked out his pipe, and said, "Look here, it's cool enough now, I think, for us... Look here, it's cool enough now to think of a stroll, if you're inclined. All right, then what I suggest is that we walk up the park and get onto the hillside where we can look over the country. We'll have a map, and I'll show you where things are, and you can go off on your machine, or we can take the car, according as you want exercise or not. If you're ready, we can start now and be back well before 8, taking it very easy." "I'm ready. I should like my stick, though, and have you got any field glasses? I lent mine to a man a week ago, and he's gone off Lord knows where and taken them with him." Mr. Richards pondered. "Yes," he said, "I have, but they're not things I use myself, and I don't know whether the ones I have will suit you. They're old-fashioned and about twice as heavy as they make 'em now. You're welcome to have them, but I won't carry them. By the way, what do you want to drink after dinner?" Protestations that anything would do were overruled, and a satisfactory settlement was reached on the way to the front hall, where Mr. Fanshawe found his stick, and Mr. Richards, after thoughtful pinching of his lower lip, resorted to a drawer in the hall table, extracted a key, crossed to a cupboard in the panelling, opened it, took a box from the shelf, and put it in the table. "The glasses are in there," he said, "and there's some dodge of opening it, but I've forgotten what it is. You try." Mr. Fanshawe accordingly tried. There was no keyhole, and the box was solid, heavy, and smooth. It seemed obvious that some part of it would have to be pressed before anything could happen. "The corners," he said to himself, "are likely places, and infernally sharp corners they are too," he added, as he put his thumb in his mouth after exerting force on a lower corner. "What's the matter?" asked the squire. "Why, your disgusting Borgia box has scratched me, drat it," said Fanshawe. The squire chuckled unfeelingly. "You've got it open anyway," he said. "So I have. Well, I don't begrudge a drop of blood and a good cause, and here are the glasses. They are pretty heavy, as you said, but I think I'm equal to carrying them." "Ready?" said the squire. "Go on then. We go out by the garden." So they did, and passed out into the park, which sloped decidedly upwards to the hill which, as Fanshawe had seen from the train, dominated the country. It was a spur of a larger range that lay behind. On the way, the squire, who was great on earthworks, pointed out various spots where he detected or imagined traces of war ditches and the like. "And here," he said, stopping on a more or less level plot with a ring of large trees, "is Baxter's Roman villa." "Baxter?" said Mr. Fanshawe. "I forgot. You don't know about him?" "He was an old chap I got those glasses from. I believe he made them. He was an old watchmaker down in the village, a great antiquary. My father gave him leave to grub about where he liked, and when he made a find, he used to lend him a man or two to help him with the digging. He got a surprising lot of things together when he died. I dare say it's 10 or 15 years ago. I bought the whole lot and gave them to the town museum. We'll run in one of these days and look over them. The glasses came with the rest, but of course I kept them. If you look at them, you'll see they're more or less amateur work. The body of them, naturally, the lenses weren't his making." "Yes, I see. They're just the sort of thing that a clever workman in a different line of business might turn out. But I don't see why he made them so heavy. Did Baxter actually find a Roman villa here?" "Yes, there's a pavement turfed over where we're standing. It was too rough and plain to be worth taking up, but of course there are drawings of it, and the small things and pottery that turned up were quite good of their kind. An ingenious chap, old Baxter. He seemed to have a quite out-of-the-way instinct for these things. He was invaluable to our archaeologists. He used to shut up his shop for days at a time and wander off over the district, marking down places where he scented anything on the ordnance map, and he kept a book with fuller notes of the places. Since his death, a good many of them have been sampled, and there's always been something to justify them." "What a good man," said Mr. Fanshawe. "Good," said the squire, pulling up brusquely. "I meant useful to have about the place," said Mr. Fanshawe. "But was he a villain?" "I don't know about that either," said the squire. "But all I can say is, if he was good, he wasn't lucky, and he wasn't liked. I didn't like him," he added after a moment. "Oh?" said Fanshawe, interrogatively. "No, I didn't. But that's enough about Baxter. Besides, this is the stiffest bit, and I don't want to talk and walk as well." Indeed, it was hot. Climbing slippery grass slope that... Indeed it was hot. Climbing a slippery grass slope that evening. "I told you I should take you the short way," panted the squire, "and I wish I hadn't. However, a bath won't do us any harm when we get back. Here we are, and there's the seat." A small clump of old Scotch firs crowned the top of the hill, and at the edge of it, commanding the cream of the view, was a wide and solid seat on which the two disposed themselves and wiped their brows and regained breath. "Now then," said the squire, as soon as he was in a condition to talk connectedly, "this is where your glasses come in. But you'd better take a general look round first." "My word, I've never seen the view look better." Writing as I am now, with a winter wind flapping against dark windows and a rushing, tumbling sea within 100 yards, I find it hard to summon up the feelings and words which will put my reader in possession of the June evening and the lovely English landscape of which the squire was speaking. Across a broad level plain they looked upon ranges of great hills, whose uplands, some green, some furred with woods, caught the light of a sun westering but not yet low. And all the plain was fertile, though the river which traversed it was nowhere seen. There were copses, green wheat, hedges, and pasture land. The little compact white moving cloud marked the evening train. Then the eye picked out red farms and grey houses, and nearer home scattered cottages, and then the hall nestled under the hill. The smoke of chimneys was very blue and straight. There was a smell of hay in the air. There were wild roses on bushes hard by. It was the acme of summer. I just saw the bit rate drop again. I'll just hold a second while it goes back to green. Okay. After some minutes of silent contemplation, the squire began to point out the leading features, the hills and valleys, and told where the towns and villages lay. "Now," he said, "with the glasses you'll be able to pick out Fulnaker Abbey. Take a line across that big green field, then over the wood beyond it, and over the farm on the knoll." "Yes, yes," said Fanshawe, "I've got it. What a fine tower!" "You must have got the wrong direction," said the squire. "There's not much of a tower about there that I remember, unless it's Oldbourne Church that you've got a hold of. And if you call that a fine tower, you're easily pleased." "Well, I do call it a fine tower," said Fanshawe, the glasses still at his eyes, "whether it's Oldbourne or any other. And it must belong to a largish church. It looks to me like a central tower, 4 big pinnacles at the corners, and 4 smaller ones between. You must certainly go over there." "I must certainly go over there. How far is it?" "Oldbourne's about 9 miles or less," said the squire. "It's a long time since I've been there, but I don't remember thinking much of it. Now, I'll show you another thing." Fanshawe had lowered the glasses, and was still gazing in the Oldbourne direction. "No," he said, "can't make out anything with the naked eye. What was it you were going to show me?" "Good deal more to the left. It oughtn't to be difficult to find. Do you see a rather sudden knob of a hill with a thick wood on top of it? It's a dead line with the single tree on the top of the big ridge." "I do," said Fanshawe, "and I believe I could tell you without much difficulty what it's called." "Could you now?" said the squire. "Say on." "Why, Gallows Hill," was the answer. "How did you guess that?" "Well, if you don't want it guessed, you shouldn't put up a dummy gibbet with a man hanging on it." "What's that?" said the squire abruptly. "There's nothing on that hill but wood." "On the contrary," said Fanshawe, "there's a largish expanse of grass on the top and your dummy gibbet in the middle, and I thought there was something on it when I first looked, but I see there's nothing. Or is there? I can't be sure." "Nonsense, nonsense, Fanshawe. There's no such thing as a dummy gibbet or any other sort on that hill. And it's a thick wood. Fairly young plantation. I was in it myself not a year ago. Hand me the glasses, though I don't suppose I can see anything." After a pause, "No, I thought not. They won't show a thing." Meanwhile, Fanshawe was scanning the hill. It might be only 2 or 3 miles away. "Well, it's very odd," he said. "It does look exactly like a wood without the glass." He took it again. "This is one of the oddest effects. The gibbet is perfectly plain, in a grass field, and there even seem to be people on it, and carts, or a cart, with men in it. And yet, when I take the glass away, there's nothing. There must be something in the way this afternoon light falls. I shall come up earlier in the day when the sun's full on it." "Did you say that you saw people and a cart on that hill?" said the squire incredulously. "What should they be doing there at this time of day, even if the trees had been felled? Do talk sense. Look again." "Well, I certainly thought I saw them. Yes, I should say there were a few just clearing off. And now, by Jove, it does look like something hanging on the gibbet. But these glasses are so beastly heavy I can't hold them steady for long. Anyhow, you can take it from me there's no wood, and if you'll show me the road on the map, I'll go there tomorrow. The squire remained brooding for some little time. At last he rose and said, "Well, I suppose that will be the best way to settle it. And now we'd better be getting back. Bath and dinner is my idea." And on the way back he was not very communicative. They returned through the garden and went into the front hall to leave sticks, etc., in their due place, and here they found the aged butler Patton evidently in a state of some anxiety. "Beg pardon, Master Henry," he began at once, "but someone's been up to mischief here, and I'm much afraid." He pointed to the open box which contained the glasses. "Nothing worse than that, Patton," said the squire. "Mayn't I take out my own glasses and lend them to a friend? Bought with my own money, you recollect, at old Baxter's sale, eh?" Patton bowed, unconvinced. "Oh, very well, Master Henry, as long as you know who it was. Only I thought proper to name it, for I didn't think the box had been off its shelf since you first put it there. And, if you'll excuse me after what happened—" The voice was lowered, and the rest was not audible to Fanshawe. The squire replied with a few words and a gruff laugh, and called on Fanshawe to come and be shown his room. And I do not think that anything else happened that night which bears on my story. Except, perhaps, the sensation which invaded Fanshawe in the small hours that something had been let out which ought not to have been let out. It came into his dreams. He was walking in a garden which he seemed half to know, and stopped in front of a rockery made of old wrought stones, pieces of window tracery from a church, and even bits of figures. One of these moved his curiosity. It seemed to be a sculptured capital with scenes carved on it. He felt he must pull it out, and worked away, and, with an ease that surprised him, moved the stones that obscured it aside, and pulled out the block. As he did so, a tin label fell down by his feet with a little clatter. He picked it up, and read on it, "On no account move this stone. Yours sincerely, J. Patton." As often happens in dreams, he felt that this injunction was of extreme importance, and with an anxiety that amounted to anguish he looked to see if the stone had really been shifted. Indeed it had. In fact, he could not see it anywhere. The removal had disclosed the mouth of a burrow, and he bent down to look into it. Something stirred in the blackness, and then, to his intense horror, a hand emerged, a clean right hand in a neat cuff and coat sleeve, just in the attitude of a hand that means to shake yours. He wondered whether it would not be rude to let it alone, but as he looked at it, it began to grow hairy and dirty and thin, and also to change its pose and stretch out as if to take hold of his leg. At that he dropped all thought of politeness, decided to run, screamed, and woke himself up. This was the dream he remembered, but it seemed to him, as again it often does, that there had been others of the same import before, but not so insistent. He lay awake for some time, fixing the details of the last dream in his mind, and wondering in particular what the figures had been which he had seen or half seen on the carved capital. Something quite incongruous, he felt sure, but that was the most he could recall. Whether because of the dream or because it was the first day of his holiday, he did not get up very early. Nor did he at once plunge into the exploration of the country. He spent a morning, half lazy, half instructive, in looking over the volumes of the County Archaeological Society's transactions, in which there were many contributions from Mr. Baxter on finds of flint implements, Roman sites, ruins of monastic establishments, in fact, most departments of archaeology. They were written in an old, pompous, and only half-educated style. If the man had had more early schooling, thought Fanshawe, he would have been a very distinguished antiquary, or he might have been, he thus qualified his opinion a little later, but for a certain love of opposition and controversy, and, yes, a patronizing tone as of one possessing superior knowledge, which left an unpleasant taste. He might have been a very respectable artist. There was an imaginary restoration and elevation of a priory church, which was very well conceived. A fine, pinnacled central tower was a conspicuous feature of this. It reminded Fanshawe of that which he had seen from the hill, and which the squire had told him must be Oldbourne. But it was not Oldbourne. It was Fulnecker Priory. Oh well, he said to himself, I suppose Oldbourne Church may have been built by Fulnecker monks, and Baxter has copied Oldbourne Tower. Anything about it in the letterpress? Oh, I see it was published after his death. Found among his papers. After lunch, the squire asked Fanshawe what he meant to do. Well, said Fanshawe, I think I should go out on my bike about 4 as far as Oldbourne and back by Gallows Hill. That ought to be round about 15 miles, oughtn't it? About that, said the squire, and you'll pass Lambsfield and Wonston, both of which are worth looking at. There's a little glass at Lambsfield and the stone at Wonston. Good, said Fanshawe. I'll get tea somewhere. And may I take the glasses? I'll strap them on my bike on the carrier. Of course, if you like, said the squire. I really ought to have some better ones. If I go into the town today, I'll see if I can pick up some. Why should you trouble to do that if you can't use them yourself? Said Fanshawe. Oh, I don't know. One ought to have a decent pair, and, well, old Patton doesn't think those are fit to use. Is he a judge? He's got some tale. I don't know, something about old Baxter. I've promised to let him tell me about it. Seems very much on his mind since last night. Why that? Did he have a nightmare like me? He had something. He was looking an old man this morning, and he said he hadn't closed an eye. Well, let him save up his tale till I come back. Very well, if I can. Look here, are you going to be late? If you get a puncture 8 miles off and have to walk home, what then? I don't trust these bicycles. I shall tell them to give us cold things to eat. I shan't mind that, whether I'm late or early, but I've got things to mend punctures. And now I'm off. It was just as well that the squire had made arrangements about the cold supper, Fanshawe thought, and not for the first time, as he wheeled his bicycle up the drive about 9 o'clock. So also the squire thought, and said several times as he met him in the hall, rather pleased at the confirmation of his want of faith in bicycles than sympathetic with his hot, weary, thirsty, and indeed haggard friend. In fact, the kindest thing he found to say was, You want a long drink tonight? Cider cup do? All right. Hear that, Patton? Cider cup, iced, lots of it. Then to Fanshawe, Don't be all night over your bath. By 9:30 they were at dinner, and Fanshawe was reporting progress, if progress it might be called. I got to Lambsfield very smoothly, and saw the glass. It is very interesting stuff, but there's a lot of lettering I couldn't read. Not with the glasses, said the squire. Those glasses of yours are no manner to use inside a church, or inside anywhere, I suppose, for that matter, but the only places I took 'em into were churches. Well, go on, said the squire. However, I took some sort of photograph of the window, and I dare say an enlargement would show what I want. Then Wonston. I should think that stone was a very out of the way thing, only I don't know about that class of antiquities. Has anybody opened the mound it stands on? Baxter wanted to, but the farmer wouldn't let him. Oh, well, I should think it would be worth doing. Anyhow, the next thing was Fulnecker and Oldbourne. You know, it's very odd about that tower I saw from the hill. Oldbourne Church is nothing like it, and of course there's nothing over 30 feet high at Fulnecker, though you can see it had a central tower. I didn't tell you, did I, that Baxter's fancy drawing of Thornacre shows a tower exactly like the one I saw?" "So you thought, I dare say," put in the squire. "No, it wasn't a case of thinking. The picture actually reminded me of what I'd seen, and I made sure it was Oldbourne well before I looked at the title." "Well, Baxter had a very fair idea of architecture. I dare say what's left made it easy for him to draw the right sort of tower." "That may be it, of course, but I'm doubtful if even a professional could have got it so exactly right. There's absolutely nothing left at Thornacre but the bases and piers which supported it. However, that isn't the oddest thing." "What about Gallows Hill?" said the squire. "Here, Patton, listen to this. I told you what Mr. Fanshawe said he saw from the hill." "Yes, Master Henry, you did. And I can't say I was so much surprised, considering it." All right, you keep that till afterwards. We want to hear what Mr. Fanshawe saw today. Go on, Fanshawe. You turned to come back by Ackford and Thorfield, I suppose?" "Yes, and I looked into both the churches. Then I got to the turning, which goes up to the top of Gallows Hill. I saw that if I wheeled my machine over the field at the top of the hill, I could join the home road on this side. It was about 6:30 when I got to the top of the hill, and there was a gate on my right, where it ought to be, leading into the belt of plantation." "You hear that, Patton? A belt, he says." "So I thought it was, a belt. But it wasn't. You were quite right, and I was hopelessly wrong. I cannot understand it. The whole top is planted quite thick. Well, I went on into this wood, wheeling and dragging my bike, expecting every minute to come to a clearing. Then my misfortunes began. Thorns, I suppose. First I realized that the front tire was slack, then the back. I couldn't stop to do more than try to find the punctures and mark them, but even that was hopeless, so I ploughed on, and the farther I went, the less I liked the place." "Not much poaching in that cover, eh, Patton?" said the squire. "No, indeed, Master Henry. There's very few cares to go—" "No, I know. Never mind that now. Go on, Fanshawe." "I don't blame anybody for not caring to go there. I know I had all the fancies one least likes. Steps crackling over twigs behind me, indistinct people stepping behind trees in front of me, yes, and even a hand laid on my shoulder. I pulled up very sharp at that and looked round, but there really was no branch or bush that could have done it. Then, when I was just about at the middle of the plot, I was convinced that there was someone looking down on me from above, and not with any pleasant intent. I stopped again, or at least slackened my pace to look up, and as I did, down I came, and barked my shins abominably on, what do you think? A block of stone with a big square hole in the top of it. And within a few paces there were two others just like it. The three were set in a triangle. Now, do you make out what they were put there for?" "I think I can," said the squire, who was now very grave and absorbed in the story. "Sit down, Patton." It was time, for the old man was supporting himself by one hand and leaning heavily on it. He dropped into a chair and said in a very tremulous voice, "You didn't go between them stones, did you, sir?" "I did not," said Fanshawe emphatically. "I dare say I was an ass, but as soon as it dawned on me where I was, I just shouldered my machine and did my best to run. It seemed to me as if I was in an unholy, evil sort of graveyard, and I was most profoundly thankful that it was one of the longest days and still sunlight. Well, I had a horrid run, even if it was only a few 100 yards. Everything caught on everything. Handles and spokes and carrier and pedals caught in them viciously. Or I fancied so. I fell over at least 5 times. At last I saw the hedge, and I couldn't trouble to hunt for the gate." "There is no gate on my side," the squire interpolated. "Just as well I didn't waste time then. I dropped the machine over, somehow, and went into the road, pretty near head first. Some branch or something got my ankle at the last moment. Anyhow, there I was out of the wood, and seldom more thankful or more generally sore. Then came the job of mending my punctures. I had a good outfit, and I'm not at all bad at the business, but this was an absolutely hopeless case. It was 7 when I got out of the wood, and I spent 50 minutes over one tire. As fast as I found a hole and put on a patch and blew it up again, it went flat again. So I made my mind to walk. That hill isn't 3 miles away, is it? Well, that hill isn't 3 miles away, is it? Not more across country, but nearer 6 by road. Thought it must be. I thought I couldn't have taken well over the... I thought I couldn't have taken well over the hour. Okay, sentence confusing me. Excuse me 1 second. I thought I couldn't have taken well over the hour over less than 5 miles, even leading a bike. Well, there's my story. Where's yours and Patton's? Mine? I'd no story, said the squire. But you weren't very far out when you thought you were in the graveyard. There must be a good few of them up there, Patton, don't you think? They left them there when they fell to bits, I fancy. Patton nodded, too much interested to speak. Don't, said Fanshawe. Now then, Patton, said the squire, you've heard what sort of a time Mr. Fanshawe's been having. What do you make of it? Anything to do with Mr. Baxter? Fill yourself a glass of port and tell us. Ah, that done me good, Master Henry, said Patton, after absorbing what was before him. If you really wish to know what were in my thoughts, my answer would be clear in the affirmative. Yes. He went on, warming to his work. I should say, as Mr. Fanshawe's experience of today were very largely due to the person you named. And I think, Master Henry, as I have some title to speak, in view of me having been many years on speaking terms with him, and swore in to be jury on the coroner's inquest near this time 10 years ago, you being then, if you carry your mind back, Master Henry, travelling abroad, and no one here to represent the family. Inquest? Said Fanshawe. An inquest on Mr. Baxter, was there? Yes, sir, on that very person. The facts as led up to that occurrence was these. The deceased was, as you may have gathered, a very peculiar individual in his habits. In my idea, at least, but all must speak as they find. He lived very much to himself, without neither chick nor child, as the saying is. And how he passed away his time was what very few could offer a guess at. He lived unknown, and few could know when Baxter ceased. He lived unknown, and few could know when Baxter ceased to be, said the squire to his pipe. I beg pardon, Master Henry, I was just coming to that. But when I say how he passed away his time, to be sure we know how intent he was in rummaging and ransacking out all the history of the neighbourhood, and the number of things he managed to collect together. Well, it was spoke of for miles around as Baxter's Museum, and many a time when he might be in the mood, and I might have an hour to spare, if he showed me his pieces of pots and what not. Going back, by his account, to the times of the ancient Romans. However, you know more about this than what I do, Master Henry. Only thing I was going to say was this, as know what he might, and interesting as he might be in his talk, there was something about the man. Well, for one thing, no one ever remembered to see him in church nor yet chapel at service time. And that made talk. Our rector said he never come in the house but once. Never asked me what the man said. Was all anybody could ever get out of him. Then, how did he spend his nights, particularly about this season of the year? Time and again the labouring men would meet him coming back as they went out to the work, and he'd pass them by without a word, looking, they says, like someone straight out of the asylum. They see the whites of his eyes all round. He'd have a fish basket with him, that they noticed, and he always come the same road. And the talk got to be that he'd made himself some business, and that was not the best kind. Well, not so far from where you was at 7 o'clock this evening, sir. Well, now, after such a night as that, Mr. Baxter, he'd shut up the shop, and the old lady that did for him had orders not to come in, and knowing what she did about his language, she took care to obey them orders. But one day, it so happened, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the house being shut up as I said, there come a most fearful to do inside, and smoke out the windows, and Baxter crying out, seemingly in agony. So the man as lived next door, he run round to the back premises and burst the door in, and several others come too. Well, he told me he never in all his life smelt such a fearful, odour as what there was in the kitchen place. It seemed as if Baxter had been boiling something in the pot and overset it on his leg. There he laid on the floor, trying to keep back the cries, but it was more than he could manage, and when he seen the people come in, he was in a nice condition. If his tongue weren't blistered worse than his leg, it weren't his fault. Well, they picked him up and got him into a chair and run for the medical man, and one of 'em was going to pick up the pot, and Baxter, he screams out to let it alone. So he did, but he couldn't see as there was anything in the pot but a few brown bones. Then they says, Dr. Lawrence will be here in a minute, Mr. Baxter, he'll soon put you to rights. And then he was off again. He must be got up to his room. He couldn't have the doctor come in there and see all that mess. He must throw a cloth over it, anything, the tablecloth out of the parlour. Well, so they did. But there must have been poisonous stuff in that pot, for it was pretty near on 2 months before Baxter were about again. Begging pardon, Master Henry, was you going to say something? Yes, I was, said the squire. I wonder you haven't told me all this before. However, I was going to say I remember old Lawrence telling me he'd attended Baxter. He was a queer card, he said. Lawrence was up in the bedroom one day and picked up a little mask covered with black velvet and put it on for fun and went to look at himself in the glass. He hadn't time for a proper look, for old Baxter shouted out to him from the bed, "Put it down, you fool! Do you want to look through a dead man's eyes?" And it startled him so that he did put it down, and then he asked Baxter what he meant. And Baxter insisted on him handing it over, and said the man he bought it from was dead, or some such nonsense. But Lawrence felt it as he handed it over, and he declared he was sure it was made out of the front of a skull. He bought a distilling apparatus at Baxter's sale, he told me, but he could never use it. It seemed to taint everything, however much he cleaned it. But go on, Patton. Yes, Master Henry, I'm nearly done now, and time too, for I don't know what they'll think about me in the servants' hall. Well, this business of the scolding was some years before Mr. Baxter was took, and he got about again, and went on just as he'd used. And one of the last jobs he'd done was finishing up them actual glasses what you took out last night. You see, he'd made the body of them some long time, and he got the pieces of glass for them, but there was something wanted to finish 'em, whatever it was, I don't know. Well, I picked up the frame one day and I says, "Mr. Baxter, why don't you make a job of this?" And he says, when I've done that, you'll hear news, you will. There's going to be no such pair of glasses as mine when they're filled and sealed." And there he stopped, and I says, "Why, Mr. Baxter, you talk as if there was wine bottles, filled and sealed. Why, where's the necessity for that?" "Did I say filled and sealed?" he says. "Oh, well, I was suiting my conversation to my company." Well then, come round this time of year, and one fine evening I was passing his shop on my way home, and he was standing on the step very pleased with herself, and he says, "All right and tight now, my best bit of work's finished, and I'll be out with them tomorrow." "What, finish them glasses?" I says. "Might I have a look at 'em?" No, he says, "I put 'em to bed for tonight, and when I do show 'em you, you'll have to pay for peeping, so I tell you." And that, gentlemen, were the last words I heard that man say. That were the 17th of June, and just a week after there was a funny thing happened, and it was due to that we brought in unsound mind at the inquest, for barring that, no one as knew Baxter in business could anyways have laid that against him. But George Williams, as lived in the next house, and do now, he was woke up that same night with a stumbling and tumbling about in Baxter's premises, and he got out of bed, and went to the front window in the street to see if there was any rough customers about, and it being a very light night, he could make sure as there was not. Then he stood and listened, and he heard Mr. Baxter coming down his front stair, one step after another, very slow, and he got the idea as it was someone being pushed or pulled down and holding on to everything he could. Next thing he heard the street door come open, and out come Mr. Baxter into the street in his day clothes, hat and all, with his arms straight down by his sides and talking to himself, and shaking his head from one side to the other, and walking in that peculiar way that he appeared to be going, as it were, against his own will. George Williams put up the window and hear him say, "Oh, mercy, gentlemen." And then he shut up sudden as if, he said, someone clapped his hand over his mouth. Mr. Baxter threw his head back, and his hat fell off. And Williams see his face looking something pitiful, so as he could keep from calling out to him, "Why, Mr. Baxter, ain't you well?" And he was going to offer to fetch Dr. Lawrence to him, but only he heard the answer, "'Tis best you mind your own business. Put in your head." But whether it were Mr. Baxter said it so hoarse-like and faint, he never could be sure. Still, there weren't no one but him in the street, and yet Williams was that upset by the way he spoke that he shrank back from the window and went and sat on the bed. And he heard Mr. Baxter's step go on and up the road, and after a minute or more he couldn't help but look out once more, and see him going along the same curious way as before. And one thing he recollected was that Mr. Baxter never stopped to pick up his hat when it fell off, and yet there it was on his head. Well, Master Henry, that was the last anybody see of Mr. Baxter, leastways for a week or more. There was a lot of people he said was called off on business, or made off because he'd got into some scrape, but he was well known for miles round, and none of the railway people nor the public house people hadn't seen him. And the ponds was looked into and nothing found, and at last, one evening, Fakes, the keeper, come down from over the hill to the village, and he says he seen the gallows hill planting back black with birds, and that were a funny thing, because he never seen no sign of a creature there in this time. So they looked at each other a bit, and the first one says, "I'm game to go up," and the other says, "So am I, if you are." And half a dozen of them set out in the evening time to look, and took Dr. Lawrence with them. And you know, Master Henry, there he was, between them 3 stones, with his neck broke. Useless to imagine the talk which this story set going, it is not remembered. But before Patton left them, he said to Fanshawe, "Excuse me, sir, but did I understand as you took out them glasses with you today? I thought you did, and I might ask, did you make use of them at all?" "Yes, only to look at something in the church." "Oh, indeed. You took them into the church, did you, sir?" "Yes, I did. It was Lambsfield Church. By the way, I left them strapped onto my bicycle, I'm afraid, in the stable yard." "No matter for that, sir. I can bring 'em in the first thing tomorrow, and perhaps you'll be so good as to look at 'em then." Accordingly, before breakfast, after a tranquil and well-earned sleep, Fanshawe took the glasses into the garden and directed them to a distant hill. He lowered them instantly and looked at top and bottom, worked the screws, tried them again and yet again, shrugged his shoulders, and replaced them on the hall table. "Patton," he said, "they're absolutely useless. I can't see a thing. It's as if someone had stuck a black wafer over the lens." "Spoilt my glasses, have you?" said the squire. "Thank you. The only ones I've got." "You try them yourself," said Fanshawe. "I've done nothing to them." So, after breakfast, the squire took them out to the terrace and stood on the steps. After a few ineffectual attempts, "Lord, how heavy they are," he said impatiently, and in the same instant dropped them onto the stones, and the lens splintered and the barrel cracked. A little pool of liquid formed on the stone slab. It was inky black, and the odour that rose from it is not to be described. "Filled and sealed, eh?" said the squire. "If I could bring myself to touch it, I dare say we should find the seal. But that's what came of his boiling and distilling, is it? Old ghoul!" "What in the world do you mean? Don't you see, my good man? Remember what he said to the doctor about looking through dead men's eyes? Well, this was another way of it. But they didn't like having their bones boiled, I take it, and the end of it was they carried him off whither he would not. Well, I'll get a spade and we'll bury this thing decently." As they smoothed the turf over it, the squire, handing the spade to Patton, who had been a reverential spectator, remarked to Fanshawe, "It's almost a pity you took the thing into the church. You might have seen more than you did. Baxter had them for a week, I may count, but I don't see that he did much in the time." "I'm not sure," said Fanshawe. "There is that picture of Fulnecker Priory Church." The end. Thank you for listening. Yeah, well, better get the shovel. Binoculars are haunted, mate. And yes, I caught... that was fun. Yeah, I like that one. Did you like it because it mentioned, like, old buildings and stuff? Wait, where was I? Let's find the story again. Yeah, I like that one. It's kind of fun. I am glad I picked an accent I could do. Yeah, so there is literally an asterisk on the description of where this story takes place. I need not particularize further than to say that if you do... I love the way James writes. This is a tangent off a tangent already. It's like that... there are... He includes details that feel like they don't need to be necessary, apart from the fact that, like, this is how he has chosen to write it. Like when he's describing, yeah, it's a lovely, sunny, summery, warm day in the middle of June, and he's like, writing as I am now, with a winter wind flapping against dark windows and a rushing, tumbling sea within 100 yards, I find it hard to summon up the feelings and words which will put my reader in possession of the June evening and the lovely English landscape of which the squire was speaking. It's like, at no point has anyone asked, hey, Mr. James, what room are you writing this in at what time of year? But yo, let me talk, right? This room that I'm in right now is freezing cold, and I'm trying to imagine a lovely June day for you ingrates out there reading my story. I'm struggling. Picture a June day and go on with your lives. It's like, thanks. And, yeah, he was in the depths of the country. I need not particularize further than to say that if you divided the map of England into 4 quarters, he would have been found in the southwestern of them. Like, and yes, apparently there is literally an asterisk by that, which at the end of the book says that, like, at a later point, he confirmed that it meant Herefordshire, which I want to find... Where is it? A View from a Hill. Yeah, in the southwestern of them. All the place names in the story are fictitious, but MRJ wrote in the preface to the CGS that Herefordshire was the imagined scene of A View from a Hill. So, yes. He writes like your brain thinks. He'll get there when he damn well gets there. Yeah, like this. Yeah, I don't know, it's fun. You off, Perilla? No worries. I'm going to be wrapping things up in a second. Thank you. I hope the jigsaws were good. Take care. Have a good rest of the weekend. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It's an interesting detail to me, because it's part of the framing device that he seems to go for with so many of his stories of... I, your author, M.R. James, name's on the front of the book, hello, how you doing? I am the one telling this story to you, but it is not my story. It is an account of other people who are totally real people, for real, by the way. They were real. This happened. These are accounts of things that happened to people, said by people. You're getting those from me, your author, M.R. James. And so it's like, it's very much... I am me writing and telling this story to you, not like he's like building up these sort of layers of truth and fiction to it, which is, yeah, it's interesting to me. It's not, I don't think it's unique to him. Other authors were doing the same thing. But when you get kind of acknowledgements, Law and Order voice, these are their stories. Yeah, true. It's interesting how, yeah, that seems to be, ooh, punching the mic. And it's not that doesn't happen now, because that's absolutely a thing you get now. But it feels, I'm sort of curious when fiction kind of shifted, because it feels like there's a lot of stories in this time that are written in a similar style to that. Not all of them, of course, but yeah, it certainly in the ghost stories that we read, there have been more than a number that sort of deliver the story in that way. And then more recently, it's more just like, here's a bunch of stuff that happened to some people. Another thing as well, like various parts of the descriptions of that reminded me of I forget the name of it, but there was the Algernon Blackwood story that I read, which was about like a surveyor of some kind. Yeah, I'm completely blanking on the title. I think I know the book that it's in. It's totally happened to my cousin's friend's babysitter. Yes, exactly. It's real, bro. I'm telling you. But yeah, the Algernon Blackwood story about the surveyor just basically going through a spooky woods to see someone who wanted to have the woods cut down, and has a spooky folk horror time in the woods when it kind of tries to bully him. Yeah, bro, you're being bullied by that tree? Yeah, you bet. And kind of the same thing happens here to our fella. And I'm wondering which came first, because they do feel very similar, but this is like a much longer, more full story. You like that one? Yeah, I did too. Again, it was a very, very short, very straightforward. There's a guy. He's gone into this woods. Ancient Lights. That was it. Thank you. Which I don't get why it's called that, but sure. But yeah, it's like that was just boom. Little bit of woods over here. It's haunted. Man goes through it. It's haunted. He leaves, and then you find out, oh yes, he was going to see someone who wants to cut down the woods. Yeah, well, that's why he had a bad time in the woods. Boom, done. You're in, you're out, story's over. Everyone has a good time. And this is like a much, much longer version of that. And I love that it's like the butler who's just standing patiently by knows everything that's going on. He's here ready with the exposition, but the butler, he can wait. No, Patton, we don't need, we don't need your story. Stop trying to tell me the story. No, it's not interesting. Anyway, you go out on your bike and have a lovely jolly time on that infernal contraption that I trust not. It's just a bicycle, mate. It's a bike. It's not a Tesla. No, don't trust it. And I was right. Got punctured. Look, see, complete waste of time. Pardon, what was that you were trying to say? The binoculars are haunted. What? And yeah, it's it's a fun one. I like it. It was good. But this frame drop is just really bothering me. I don't know what's causing it. I guess, thinking about it actually, it's probably going to strike on Monday as well. Because we've reached the end of the stream, so I might as well look ahead to the coming week. In theory, Tesla bikes would have square wheels. Tesla bikes would just catch fire. They just make them out of like magnesium or something. Yeah, I'm gonna send you off somewhere, probably raid. I'm guessing Blue Skittle is on, so we might go over and say hello to Blue Skittle. Are they on? They are on, doing art. Good. Excuse me. Skittle is always a good time. So we're gonna scoot on over there and say hello, and then, in theory, all being well, we should be back on Monday evening, when I and Lucy, if she's available to join to hop on a call, will be taking part in some wiki racing. What's wiki racing? Why, it's using the power of Wikipedia, but in this case a special instance of Wikipedia, to go from one place, one article, to another article as fast as possible, as part of a competition being run by twitch.tv/Sean Mall, famed, esteemed comedian and entertainer Sean Morley, is for his community hosting a competition, and I think participating as well. And this will be using the cool piece of software called Museum of All Things, which is a kind of first-person 3D visualization of Wikipedia, where each article is represented by a room, or is presented as a room with, images on the walls and the links away from the article as corridors that connect to other rooms. It's very cool. And the pitch is to use that, and it will be each runner will be supplied a randomly generated bingo card with the goal of completing as many squares on, well, trying to make bingo basically, but complete as many squares and try to make a bingo on this card in the span of 2 hours. And I will be participating and requiring your brains and intelligence to help me, because there are things about which I know, and as we discovered on a few days ago when I tried, we did a quick test of it all on the Longest John's channel, there's things that I'm kind of ignorant about. Australia, bold of me to have a working brain, well, semi-functional. Yeah, Australia, struggled a little bit. Better on Boeing, turns out. Oh yeah, bold of you, I have a working brain. Cool boast. Yeah, we're both doing well, buddy. Don't worry about it. But yeah, I'm looking forward to that. It should be a good and definitely not stressful time. So yeah, that we will ideally be here. I guess it's starting, I think, actually, like, the event starts at like 8 PM, so I'll probably be putting the stream on early and keeping an eye on Sean's stream to see what's going on. But yeah, I'll be checking the details and probably say some more about it on the Discord as we get to Monday, and there's maybe some last minute bits of information. But yeah, that's happening Monday. Obviously, no cheating. You're not allowed to look at target articles and then just tell me where to go. That's not the spirit of the game. Don't do that. Don't want that. But otherwise, yeah, viewers are welcome to contribute suggestions, as long as they are suggestions born of ignorance. Not, again, don't look. You can know stuff, but don't cheat. But yeah, gonna be a good time. Be there for that. That's when we'll next be back. And then I guess we'll just run the schedule back. Probably Lucy middle of next week, and then me at the weekend. But for now, it is my job to send you. Let's go Bother Skittle again. They are definitely not a cat. They do very good art, like fantasy landscapes, and they hide cats in them. So if you like, frankly, like if you like good fantasy landscape art and cats and video game music, do I have the channel recommendation for you? It's a Blue Skittle. We're going there now. Now back to your goblin cave. Hell yeah. Have yourself a fantastic evening. Hubris, thank you for the stream. Stay safe, everyone. You too. Thank you for being here. And yeah, anyone else who's been here from the start, dropped in. And if you're listening on YouTube, if you're still here on YouTube, why? We're done. Chuck us a follow or subscribe, whatever. Same here as well. We love having more people watching this. I'm gonna go. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. Goodbye and good night.